Welcome to the podcast of Clearview Church. We believe seeing Jesus changes everything and everyone. We hope you enjoy this week's message.
A couple weeks ago, it was a Friday night. The girls and I, Jessica was out of town, and the girls and I were walking the dog. Because Jessica was gone, I had decided to keep it really chill. We were going to eat pizza and watch a movie at home. And because Jessica wasn't there to vote otherwise, the movie that was selected was the OG original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And so anyway, we go to walk the dog, and as we're walking down the block, we see our neighbors who are also walking their dog. They're some of our best friends. We have two girls, they have two boys the exact same ages, and they shout out, "Hey, we're going to have a movie night tonight." And the girls shout out, "Hey, we are too." And then, in unison, they all four go, "Let's do it together." Okay? So far, so good, right? But now what has to happen? We have to negotiate, campaign, if you will, their movie or our movie, their house or our house, their snacks or our snacks. And ours, so they were going to watch Star Wars Rogue One, and we already had two, they had picked theirs, we had picked ours. This wasn't brainstorming, right? We had two options, if you will. Ours was already rented, and we had maybe already started it. We'd watched a few minutes of it, and of course is super funny. And theirs was newer, longer, they'd get to stay up later, et cetera, et cetera. So there was all this lobbying, whose house had comfier seating and better snacks and all of that. And before you knew it, the kids had come to a decision to sulk off to their respective houses, dry their tears, and never be friends again. Both sides had to do some serious parenting. Did I mention Jessica was out of town and I was trying to keep it chill? This was not the plan. Anyway, both sides had to do some real parenting to help them repair and not miss out on the fun of being together. And at a very late hour, it finally got worked out that we were going to watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on Friday night, and they could get together Saturday morning and watch Star Wars Rogue One. Whew. And I just thought it was interesting, right? That when we had our little plan and they had their little plan, everybody was happy. But then suddenly there was more, right? There were options. And somehow that more became less. Like as soon as there were two options, two parties, two candidates, what happened? All of a sudden there was a power dynamic. Power changes things, doesn't it? I feel like that's a relevant question given that we're in an election season. What's everyone fighting for? Power. And like kids just out walking the dog, we Christians can get caught up in that too if we're not real careful. So I thought, and I don't know why I thought this. I mean, I do, but I also am like, why did I think this? This series is going to be about one thing that I love, the church, and two things that are absolutely breaking my heart right now. The moral crisis of church scandals. We'll talk about that next week. But you've seen the headlines too. In recent years, it has felt nonstop. Story after story coming out of toxic, abusive church leadership, sexual abuse and misconduct, fraud. And I cannot help but think, every time I see one of those stories, not just of the immediate victims, but all of those inside and outside of the church whose faith is hanging on by a thread or completely torn apart by the failures of those they once trusted and once looked up to. And it just feeds into this general perception of outsiders that Christians are all just a bunch of hypocrites. And so next week, we'll talk about that. How would Jesus respond? How should we? And today, I want to talk about the issue of power, which of course is not unrelated to all the scandals we'll talk about next week, but I think you'll see by the end of today why we have to start here with power. And it's going to be a lot today. In some respects, this is a pretty heady lesson that you may have to go re-listen to parts of it. If this is not already on your radar, I'm going to have to go quick, but I'm happy to have conversations with you about it. And I want to promise you, as you'll see, there's going to be plenty of Bible in today's lesson, but it's going to take me a minute to get there. To start with, can we at least say that it is problematic when followers of Jesus, followers of a crucified Messiah, seem just as eager for power, just as willing to overlook character flaws, just as willing to say that the ends justify the means as everybody else? And again, I think of all those who see the church now as just one more political group, one more power-seeking group, and may choose very well to opt out. There are today, do you know this? In America, there are more religiously unaffiliated adults than there have ever been. More people than ever who say that the church is too involved in politics, too partisan, and at the same time, people are less confident than ever, statistically, less confident than ever that the church of Jesus Christ is a force for good on this earth. And what we have to wrestle with, like it or not, is that those things are all related. If you're looking for something to put in your notes, here's the first thing. As we lose focus, some lose faith. Right? Think about how easy it is for Christians, or for outsiders today to say all Christians care about anymore is politics. So anyway, I know the rule, you do too. There's two things you don't talk about in polite company, and you guys are such polite company, right? Politics and religion, and this series is both. Shall we do it? All right, let's start with power. This message has been living inside of me, brewing for a couple years almost. It started for me when I was on sabbatical in 2022. As part of that sabbatical, I took the opportunity to read through this huge tome of a book that I probably wouldn't have tackled otherwise by this Dutch historian, Rutger Bregman. And essentially, it's a revisionist history that challenges the idea that people are fundamentally bad and selfish and untrustworthy. And he goes point by point through all the reasons why we think that people are bad and then offers an alternate take. And I really was enjoying it. But then as you read it, you go, okay, then why do so many bad things happen, right? And that's the deal. If people aren't fundamentally bad, you have to have, if people are mostly good, why do bad things happen? You have to have an alternate explanation. And so you come to that section of the book, and his argument is more complex and multifaceted and nuanced than this, but really it's not. He says it comes down to power. Like kids happily walking a dog until they're not. And he has this chapter called How Power Corrupts. That is the most sobering thing I have read in a long time. And I thought I would share that information with you today. Let's start with cookies. So one of the experiments that's been done is researchers will invite 3 people into a room for a small group discussion. And they will name one of those 3 people the leader of the group, the leader of the discussion. And they just assign it at random. That's important, right? This is not someone who has more experience or knowledge or expertise. This is just one person at random who is named the leader. And then midway through the discussion, one of the researchers will come in the room and offer them a plate of cookies as a thank you for being part of this discussion group. And this is the real experiment, because on the plate there are 5 cookies. So everybody gets one, and then of course you have to leave one on the plate for etiquette, right? Who gets that final cookie? Every single time, it's the person who was randomly named leader. They call this the Cookie Monster experiment. Because not only does the person with a little bit of power automatically assume that the extra cookie belongs to them, they are also more likely to eat with their mouth open, make noise, and spray crumbs all over their shirt. Some of you are thinking about your boss. This is a funny one, right? Except there are dozens of similar studies that show the same thing. That power doesn't just change things, power changes people. Have you ever heard the idea that BMW drivers are the rudest? Well, they did an experiment on that. They put random people, behind the wheel of an old beat-up car, and they have them drive toward a crosswalk where a volunteer steps off the curb, okay? And when they're driving a Ford Pinto or whatever, how many of these volunteers stop, as the law requires, at the crosswalk for the pedestrian to cross? 100%. Then they put other volunteers, and again, this is random. It's not like they put good drivers in one group and bad drivers in another. They put other random volunteers in a luxury car, like a Mercedes, for example. 45% of those drivers blew past the pedestrian at the crosswalk. And so literally, the more expensive the car you put someone in, the ruder the road manners that they demonstrate. You act differently depending how powerful you feel. Remember the old drug with the frying pan and the egg? This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. No one under 40 does. Okay. Well, it turns out that power is one of those drugs. Do you know the term mirroring? This is a huge part, like we are social creatures, this is a huge part of relationships and bonding and all that. So mirroring is this phenomenon where we tend to mirror those around us, right? And this is a good thing. It's a huge part of empathy. So if you yawn, in fact, if I'm more likely to yawn. I'm about to yawn just from saying yawn. Maybe you're yawning right now. But if you laugh and smile, I will too. That's just how it works. That's mirroring. Well, they studied powerful people with a transcranial magnetic stimulation machine. I have no idea what that means. And discovered they don't do that as much. It was like they were on anesthesia. Power makes us feel less connected to other people. Here's a quote from the historian I mentioned earlier. He says, "People in power literally act like someone with brain damage. Not only are they more impulsive, self-centered, reckless, arrogant, and rude than average, they are more likely to cheat on their spouses and less attentive to other people and less interested in others' perspectives." But don't worry, guys. It gets worse. Power also makes us cynical. The more power you have, the more likely you are to see others negatively, to think of others as lazy or unreliable, and therefore needing to be managed and monitored and told what to do. And since power also makes you feel superior, who better to do that managing and controlling than you? In the Old Testament, when the Israelites entered the Promised Land, they soon come to be ruled over by these leaders called judges. They're powerful military leaders who were authorized to settle disputes, and the final judge was the most powerful of all. What was his name? Oh, we got to do some Old Testament, apparently. Come on. Who's the strong man in the Old Testament? Samson. Thank you. Those of you at home screaming at the television, but it doesn't help here in the room. He's a literal strongman. But at some point, you're reading his story and you go, it's kind of going to his head, I think. For example, he marries a Philistine girl. And she gives away the punchline to his joke. So he abandons her, just leaves. Comes back some long time later. His dad or her dad, I should say, assumed he was gone for good and has already given his daughter away in marriage to someone else. So, that would hurt. That would sting a little, right? So he does what any jilted lover would do. He catches 300 foxes, ties them together by their tails, sets them on fire, and sends them running through the fields, destroying all the Philistines' grain, and presumably 300 foxes. So the Philistines retaliate. They kill the girl and her father by burning them. So Samson retaliates again. He starts killing Philistines, and it's really horrific, right? And finally, this group of Israelites are so afraid of war, they come to talk sense to him, and they say, "What are you doing?" Here's how that goes. Then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Edom and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" He answered, "I merely did to them what they did to me." I merely did to them what they did to me. Samson is a sociopath. He shows no remorse, no concern for others. He expresses nothing but self-justification. Power can make us into monsters, y'all. Notice also in that statement the phenomenon of escalation. Have you noticed how conflict, once it gets going, always seems to get worse? The phenomenon of escalation is this. Samson is actively doing things that harm more and more people, right? He is actively making choices that make things worse and worse, but he is doing so thinking he's innocent, that he's in the right, that he's justified, that he's doing nothing at all. From the situation escalates from a petty personal matter to a property thing, to the loss of lives, to now two peoples on the verge of war, and he thinks, I'm just doing to them what they did to me. I'm just fighting fire with fire. I'm just giving them a dose of their own medicine. When we disagree with someone, we're not objective. We can't see that our payback actually escalates things and makes things worse. Power disconnects us from others. It blinds us to the effect we have on others. And so, what I got to tell you today is that Samson is the weakest person in the Bible. It's such a shame. He has all those muscles, and he never helps anyone. Read the story if you don't believe me. He never helps anyone. That's why he's the final judge, because he never wins. He never sets anyone free. He never redeems Israel. Things are too bad after him to go on. And the chapters immediately after Samson are the darkest, most disturbing material in the whole Bible. Samson had the power to rule Israel, to set his people free, and he wastes his whole life on selfish, petty nonsense. He's not strong enough to see the needs around him. He's not strong enough to help or even care about others. He's not strong enough to fight for the common good. Are you with me? He's the weakest person in the Bible. He shows us the weakness of power. But when you're strongest, when you're on top, there's no need to see things from other people's perspective, is there? There's no need for empathy. When someone disagrees, you can just ignore them. If someone annoys you, you can just do away with them. Arrange your life around them. I mean, who cares? You lose the muscles that make for strong relationships and self-control and a fair and just world. And Samson is the microcosm, right? Israel is the macro, but Israel did not learn this lesson. How does Israel's story begin? When they're absolutely what? Powerless, right? They're slaves in Egypt. They have no power at all. And God rescues them. Notice this. God uses his power not to control, but to free, to liberate. The Exodus what is it if it's not a story of divine compassion and empathy? And it becomes Israel's foundational event. It becomes Israel's core memory. It defines their worldview, their ethos. Like what makes Israel different than all the other peoples is that they have seen God do this incredibly powerful, sacrificial, redemptive thing, right? So you have all these statements like Exodus 22:21, where the Israelites are told, do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner. Why? For you were foreigners in Egypt, right? Like you know what it's like. You've been there. You know what it's like. Deuteronomy 10:19, you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. Over and over again, there are statements like this. Remember that you were an alien. Remember that you were a slave. Remember that you were poor. Remember that you were in need. That's their ethos. But then, Israel grows, gets richer, gets more powerful, judges become kings, there are firm borders established, a standing army, a capital city with an ornate palace and temple. And who's the most powerful of all the kings? Solomon, right? And Solomon's famous for what? He's famous for his righteousness and fidelity to his 700 wives and 300 concubines. Notice this from 1 Kings 9. Here is the account of the forced labor King Solomon conscripted to build the Lord's temple, his own palace, the terraces, the walls of Jerusalem and Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. The forced labor. That's a euphemism, isn't it? What's another word for forced labor? And what are they building? A temple? To whom? To what God? The one who... Generations pass, Israel grows in power, and they lose their story. And by this point, Israel has become Egypt. Solomon has become Pharaoh. The oppressed have become the oppressors. And this is the beginning of the downfall of Israel. Solomon is the final king who will rule over all of Israel. But isn't this the way of the world? Power and escalation and eventually injustice and oppression. Mark 10. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. We could talk a lot about that question, but let's keep going. What do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. So Jesus called them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles, those who have power among the nations, the way of the world, lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority, love to exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man, even I, did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. We've talked about Samson and Solomon, but Jesus is also a powerful man, isn't he? The disciples notice his power over storms and nature, demons and disease and death, and they like it. And so a couple of them, James and John, come essentially asking Jesus for a blank check. They would also like to be powerful. Can you make us second most important in the kingdom? Can you make us second most powerful? And when the other 10 disciples hear about this, they're furious. Why didn't they think of that? So Jesus has a powwow, and he says to all of them, you know the way the nations are. You know the way of the world, right? You seek power and you lord it over others. You use it for your own comfort and good. You control things and make everything exactly how you want it to be. And then he says some of the most powerful words ever spoken. Not so with you. Jesus is not looking to be a Samson or a Solomon. He's the God who sets the captives free, who declares good news for the poor and the oppressed. In his kingdom, power is just a chance to serve others. Why else would you want it? He says, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Friends, power corrupts, but the Son of God will set you free. And the reason this whole interaction is so powerful is that now there is legitimately an alternative. There's another way. The way, as it's been called, of downward mobility. The way not of politics and power seeking, but of kindness and sacrificial love. There is a kingdom that matters more than the systems of power here and now. And there's a new definition of what a leader is. A leader is not the one pursuing power, but the one helping others. You forgot to say amen. A leader is not someone seeking power, but helping others. So beware, friends. Power corrupts. People with power tend to take more than their fair share. They blow past pedestrians. They look down on others. They escalate conflicts, and they can even turn into oppressors. And the reason I said at the beginning that this is so incredibly sobering is that this information I've been sharing, this isn't about two groups of people, bad people who have power and us good folks who don't. This is what can and will and does happen to us all. So, as I preach this today, I can't just say this as a warning for some megachurch pastor out there somewhere with way more power and influence than I have. I have to wrestle with the fact that I have power and influence here, and I have to wrestle with how that might be getting into my soul already. So I need to pray desperately for humility. I need to say yes to accountability. I need to say yes to honest friendships. I need to prioritize opportunities where I hear from others because my idea isn't always going to be the right one. The truth is, it doesn't take much power at all to start following the way of the world and not the way of Jesus. And so for you, as you hear this today, this is not just a warning about how politicians and billionaires can be so out of touch. You have to take seriously the circle of power that's yours right here, right now. The privileges that you have over others. The fact, if we're candid, the fact that most of us are a lot closer to living in a temple than we are on the street. So when you think of power, right, it's so easy to picture 100 other people who have more than you, more wealth, more power, more influence, more popularity, and to not think of yourself at all. But friend, even the power you have right now is enough to make you selfish and blind. There's a way things get done in our world today. It's the same as it was 2,000 years ago and 1,000 years and 2,000 years before that. And Jesus says, not so with you. Jesus calls you to live another way, to see power like wealth as something that's not to be hoarded but spent for others. So let's get real about this. If you have a title at work, how can you leverage that position for the good of those who don't have that title? If you have education, how can you use that to create opportunities for those who can't afford that education? If you have muscles, how will you make sure that you're not a bully, but a friend to those who need protection? If you have good looks or popularity, how will you look out for the awkward and the outcast? Several years ago, there were two girls in our student ministry who were cheerleaders, and there was a really awkward, quiet boy that was also part of our student ministry, and they all happened to go to the same high school. And one day at lunch, this sounds so cliche, but one day they saw him sitting alone at lunch, and the rest of the school year they sat with him. And like that is the rubber meeting the road. Like that's one of my favorite stories. That's taking Jesus seriously. If you have extra income, how will you use that to create connection and not isolation? If you have influence, how will you disrupt the natural tendency of groups to become exclusive and insular? When insiders keep an eye out for outsiders, when the strong are always helping out the weak, friends, that's the kingdom of God. So I think we begin by praying and thanking God for setting us free. And then we ask Jesus to open our eyes to another way in this world, a way that's not all about politics and power, but about faith, hope, and love. Every 4 years, I like to remind you that we may live in a donkey-elephant world, but we are not donkey-elephant people. We are lion-lamb people. Jesus is both the powerful Lion of Judah and the sacrificial lamb that saves the world. There's another way. Power corrupts, but Jesus will set you free. The donkeys and elephants are fighting for power, but don't believe them that there's only a risk if the other party wins. There's a weakness to power, what it can do to our souls and our friendships and our neighborhoods, the way it can infect us all. Followers of Jesus can opt out of escalation and actually be peacemakers. Can you believe it? Because Jesus sets us free. We're not here for power, right? We're here to follow Jesus so we can actually be peacemakers as he's called us to be. And this is not unprecedented. He's our example, right? He came not to gain power, but to give it away. So we inevitably keep a little bit of distance between us and partisan politics. We know not to put our hopes in that. And we do the hard work, right, of rooting out places where power may have already grabbed hold of our souls, where it's made it possible for us to not care about someone else, where it's made it palatable for us to not care about others, or even maybe to demonize them, where it's made us notice the speck in someone else's eye and not the plank in ours. Jesus says you already have real power right now. You have the power to love God, the power to love neighbor, the power to follow Jesus, the power to make peace, the power to shine a light, the power to share good news, the power to serve others. And all I'm saying is don't let power make you weak. Would you pray with me? Father God, we thank you so much for the example of Jesus Christ that shines like the brightest beacon of light in the history of the world. This alternative way of love and sacrifice, kindness and patience, welcoming and hospitality, of justice and peace. Help us be so focused on him that our faith is strengthened and perhaps the faith of those around us, that others might see the light of Jesus shining in us and through us. Free us, God, from the dark parts of our hearts, where bitterness, where power, where worldly desires have come in to corrupt and to steal, to kill and destroy. Assure us, God, that Jesus is still here for us to give us life and life to the full. We pray in his holy name and we say, amen.
Thanks for listening. If this was meaningful to you, subscribe. Find out more about us at clearview.church, or, best of all, join us in person. We worship Sundays at 10 a.m. on the campus of LSU Shreveport.